conversation where I wanted to talk to y'all about the only difference between a corporation and heirs property. So a lot of you may be wondering, what in the world does a corporation have to do with heirs property? But we're going to talk about that in a minute. I was on earlier, so for those of you who joined me live and left or who were cut off suddenly, I apologize for that. My AC unit beside me started going. The chickens were laying eggs. It was a lot of noise, and it was just like messing with my head. And I was just like, okay, I gotta stop. I gotta turn the AC unit down or up so that it's not running for a moment. And then I had to let the chickens lay their eggs. But I am back to talk to y'all about the only difference. Well, there are a lot of differences, but the main difference between a corporation and heirs property. So first, let's talk about why a corporation and heirs property are similar. Well, both of them are entities that multiple people own. Heirs property is land that multiple people own, or a house, any kind of real estate or property that a lot of people own. Corporation is a business entity that where there are multiple owners. There are a lot of people who own the same piece of property, so to speak, because a business entity is property. Heirs property is property. Business entity is property. There is the potential for income from a corporation. There's the potential for income from heirs property. You can do activities either one where you can make money using that property. There is the potential for disagreement with the corporation and with heirs property. And there is the potential for people deciding they don't want to be together anymore with the corporation and with heirs property. But there are a lot of differences between the two, and I'm sure that y'all can already name some. Feel free to put in the chat things that you see as different between the corporation and heirs property as I list them out myself. So one thing with the one difference that I wanted to talk to y'all about, the big category of difference between the corporation and heirs property, and the thing that I want everybody who owns heirs property to bring to their situation is structure. The biggest difference between a corporation and heirs property ownership is structure. A corporation has structure, heirs property does not. When you have heirs property, you have more than one member of the same family who inherited this property. It's been passed down from one generation to the next in such a way that now multiple members of the same family own property. So as the family grows, the number of owners of this one property grows. And as you can imagine, things can become pretty chaotic. You have everybody owning a bit of it, which means that nobody really owns any of it because you can't use it like an owner if you have heirs property. There's limitations. You can go on the property, you can do things to make money from the property on your own, but your ability to use the property is only going to be as good as the other person who owns the property with you, who decides whether or not they want to allow you to have full use of the property in the way that you want. The ability to bring in revenue from the property, you may have some opportunities to make money. Like a lot of people will farm their family's heirs property. They might live on it, or they might lease it out to someone who's going to either live on it or farm it. But they're not going to get as much as they would get if they had clear ownership of that property. If they were the sole owner, they have so many more opportunities for how they could use that property. So when it comes to heirs property, you are limited in what's available to you versus if you have 100% ownership, you you have more ways of making of maximizing your use of that property. Let's turn back to a corporation. Like I said, a corporation has structure. And so all of the different issues that come up with heirs property, a corporation has a structure to deal with that. One of the first things I want to talk about is a purpose. When you have a corporation, it is created for a specific purpose. You know what that corporation is about. You know that Coca-Cola is about making sodas. They make water and they make some other drinks as well, but they are not in the lawn care business. They are not in the child care business. They are not selling shoes. They might co-partnership with somebody who's selling shoes. I don't know if they got Coca-Cola shoes or not, but if they do, then Coca-Cola is not producing the shoes. They might, license their brand so that the shoe company can use it, but they have a specific purpose. All corporations have a specific purpose, or else they would have no reason to exist. Compared to heirs property, a lot of times there is a general family consensus that this property is important to us. The purpose of it is to continue our family legacy, but the purpose is limited and it could vary. You got one person over here who thinks the purpose of this land is to make me as much money as possible. Another person thinks that the purpose of this land is to provide a place for family members to stay if they're ever in between homes. Another person might see the purpose of this land as being to hunt, to fish, to provide recreation. Another one thinks the purpose of it is to provide me a livelihood so that I can farm and I can sell the timber from it and I can make money from this property because this is my livelihood. All those people have different purposes for the land. And as you can imagine, if one person's purpose is different from another person's purpose, there might be a conflict. And they might not be able to continue to do both of their purposes because they have two different visions for how that property is supposed to be used, what it's supposed to be used for. So with a corporation, you have a clear purpose. It's going to be stated in the bylaws. It's going to be something that everybody knows that this corporation exists for this specific purpose. I want heirs property owners to bring that into their property ownership structure. I want heirs property owners to have a purpose for the land that they have, a shared purpose that everyone can agree upon, and that is not going to be fought over because everybody has a different intention for the purpose of that land. So y'all see some of the differences. So I said one difference is structure. That's the main difference. But underneath structure, you have purpose because the structure is going to carry out that purpose, going to support that purpose. Another thing under that whole umbrella of structure that corporations have is a process. So you are going to have things that need to be done for your land or for your entity. If you have a corporation or if you have land, there are things that need to be done. A corporation is going to have it very clearly spelled out in their their operations manual, their processes and procedures, even in their bylaws. There's going to be certain things that are spelled out very specifically to identify the process to complete certain things within that entity. So the corporation is going to have a process for how do we make decisions? How do we decide if we're going to buy new property? How do we decide if we're going to hire people? How do we decide if we're going to go into a new market? Like whatever it is we're going to do with this with this corporation, there's going to be a very carefully laid out process. When you look at heirs property, there is no spelled out process. It is everybody on this property, everybody use it how they want. And there might be some people in the family who try to exercise a certain level of leadership to say, these are the rules for how we're going to use this property. But that person is going to be limited in what they can do because there is no spelled out process in something like the bylaws or in the other documents that that corporation has. You can bring that into your heirs property scenario. For example, if you create a corporation or a limited liability company or some other kind of legal entity, you can create a process to manage your family's heirs property. And of course, that's what I would encourage you to do because when there is no clearly defined process, there are no checks and balances. There are no, if somebody does not follow this is the consequence. There's none of that inherent in heirs property. Some of it's built into your state laws, but state laws are not always going to be what you would want things to be. So, looking at that, corporations have process. We need to bring a certain level of process into heirs property ownership. Let me know if y'all tracking me in the comments or in the chat. Let me know if you are getting what I'm talking about. If this is landing with you, let me know. If you have a question or a comment that you wanted to make, let me know that as well. And I'll see if I can address that. So we talked about purpose. We talked about process. All of those fall under structure. Another thing that corporations have, I would put these together for the sake of time. They have clarity of ownership and they have clarity of control. So you know who owns a corporation. It's going to be listed in their governance documents, in their bylaws, and whatever kind of documentation they have. For example, with LLC, we have an operating agreement, and I usually have an exhibit in there that lists all of the members of that LLC. As members change, people die, people get brought into the company, people leave the company, which is a LLC is a company. So with the family land ownership in the LLC, we can say who is going to be, we can tell who the members are. There's documentation to show who the members of a particular LLC are. Corporations have that information as well. But when you have heirs property and it has not been put into any kind of legal entity, no kind of legal structure, you are not going to know exactly who owns the property, who the members of, who are the people who have an interest in this property. You may not know how much everybody owns. You got all these people owning a piece of property, a piece of the property. They have an interest in the property. You don't know if they own 1/4. You don't know if they own 1/8, 1/16, 1/32. It could be any little bit of fraction of ownership that a person has. You don't know what they own. So when it comes to heirs property, we want to have some clarity about who the owners of property are. That's where a corporation, they have clarity in ownership. They also have clarity of control. You know who's in charge of that corporation. You know who the CEO is, the president, the vice president, you know who the treasurer, the secretary, any other officers, the chief operations officer, the chief financial officer. You know who those people are based on the documentation for that corporation. With heirs property, you don't have that clearly laid out. And we need to bring that structure in. Also, when we look at corporations, they have a clear succession plan. You know, if the CEO dies or the president dies, or they decide they don't want to be over the company anymore, they decide that they want to do crazy stuff and other people don't want them to be part of that anymore, there's a process for determining who is going to come next. You're not going to just have like CEO died, now the corporation's over. If it's a well governed organization, you're going to know what the succession plan is. You're going to know if the CEO dies, you know who's next. You know how to pass the torch. With heirs property, there's no clear leadership. Usually it's going to be, you know, the oldest aunt, the oldest uncle, or somebody like that who's been in charge for 30 years. That person becomes, they get dementia or they get sick, they die, and there's nobody in charge. It's the next oldest person, maybe, or it's going to be just somebody who decided that they want to be in charge. But there's no clear succession plan in place. Whereas a corporation, they have that laid out in their bylaws or their other governance documents. Another thing that corporations have, they have a clear way to bring in their income. They have a clear way to distribute their income to the people who are a part of that corporation, their shareholders. Whereas with heirs property, you may bring money in or you may not, because it's going to be hard to do business with heirs property. Most people who are doing business with property owners, they want to know who the person is that they are doing business with. And if it's, oh, it's all descendants of Miss Betty Lou Jean, who died in 1964, and she had 7 kids, and we don't really know all of her grandkids and great grandkids. You're not going to get anybody with a good business practice coming to cut your timber. They're gonna be like, no, we're not doing that. You're not gonna be able to get any kind of financing for your property. You're not gonna be able to make certain improvements. You are not going to be able to take advantage of so many opportunities if you are dealing with heirs property. Whereas a corporation, we know who we're dealing with. We know who is responsible for this corporation, who has the legal authority to enter contracts on behalf of the corporation. All of that's spelled out. So I know I can do business with you. I know you got insurance, you got all the things that you need to have in order for us to do business with you. And we know you're going to honor your contracts, or we at least have going to save for the upkeep of the corporation or the maintenance of it, making sure that they have enough savings in place just in case things don't go exactly as they want it to go. They also know when we're going to send money to chat to say we can hear you. Okay, I see that I'm back. I don't know what happened. I apologize for that brief exit. I don't know how long I was gone. If anybody knows what I talked about last, please put it in the chat. Otherwise, I'm going to just pick up the best way I can. So I think I was talking about income and just talking about how with heirs property, there is no clear way of determining how income is going to be generated. There is no clear way of determining um, how, who gets a check. A lot of times when it comes to heirs property, the family will get together and they'll do something like sell timber. They'll find a way to do it. I don't know how, or bring some money into the property. And a lot of times they'll leave people off because they're like, well, you didn't pay the taxes, so you don't get to share in this money, or you didn't do this, so you don't get to share in that. You ain't gonna have all that with a corporation. They're gonna have it clear. If you got certain obligations financially under that corporation, they will be spelled out as to how much you are responsible for. Like if you, for the first 3 years of the corporation, they want to make sure that they have a certain amount of money built up. They might say everybody needs to contribute this amount of money to invest into this entity. And they know if you don't contribute your money, and they know what they're gonna do if you don't. Whereas with heirs property, you know, everybody y'all pay y'all taxes. Y'all know it's 10 of y'all, it's 10 of brothers and sisters. So everybody y'all figure out amongst yourselves how much everybody gonna contribute. But we need 10 people. We're gonna split this 10 ways. All it's just these informal ways of getting things done. And then there's no clear process for, let's say we do pay the taxes. What happens after that? Do we what if somebody doesn't pay the taxes? Do we pay what they didn't pay? And if we pay what they didn't pay, will we get more when income comes to the property? All of those questions are answered when you have a corporation, because that's going to be spelled out in your bylaws and your other organizational documents. So to conclude, I'm not saying that if you own heirs property, that a corporation, putting your property in a corporation is the best way to go for you. I typically recommend an LLC. I know a lot of people are interested in trusts. I'm not as enthusiastic about creating trust for heirs property for a lot of reasons, but I am more so inclined to help people set up LLCs for their family land. So that's something that you'll be interested in. If you have heirs property, you want to have some structure that's more aligned with what a corporation has versus what you and your family have now, reach out to us. Our contact information will be in the description below. We are McClendon Law Office, McClendonLawandConsulting.com. Y'all help me this morning. This is my back porch talk. I didn't say that at the beginning, but it's still morning time. Our website is McClendonLawOffice.com. The name of the firm is McClendon Law and Consulting. And who am I? I am attorney Veronica McClendon, the owner and CEO of McClendon Law and Consulting. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Georgia. If my firm can help you, y'all let me know. In the meantime, y'all take care.